Here to break it all down, NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, New York Times White House correspondent Luke Broadwater, MSNBC political analyst and Boston Globe columnist Kimberly Atkins-Storr, and MSNBC legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Paul Butler. Vaughn, first to you. President Trump filed this lawsuit less than 24 hours after the story dropped. And even before he did it, he remarked on the recent victories he's had in settling lawsuits against media outlets. So how much did that inform the very quick response they had to this Journal story?
Of course, he, in the last year, sought settlements with ABC and with CBS based off of their reporting. And now here with this lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal and the Dow Jones, he is again trying to either win a case or reach a settlement on their reporting. Yet we know that 48 hours before the publishing of this story, he had made the threat that he would go forward with a lawsuit, and the Wall Street Journal opted to go publish it despite that threat. The Dow Jones spokesperson here after this lawsuit issuing in a statement, quote, "We have full confidence in the rigor and accuracy of our reporting and will vigorously defend against any lawsuit." And this morning, a judge in the Southern District of Florida has now been assigned to the case. Of course, judges do not act politically, but this was an Obama-appointed judge back from 2014. I'll let Paul get into the legal standard here, but we as journalists know that there is an actual malice standard here. And what the president is going to have to prove in the White House is that there is actual malice and that the Wall Street Journal knowingly and recklessly posted false information.
So, Paul, you can dig into the legal side of this for us. What about the standard that Vaughn is talking about there, and what do you see in the way that this case was filed?
Yeah, so in order for Trump to prevail, he would have to prove that the Wall Street Journal knowingly published an article that they knew was false, especially given that Trump tried to kill the article by talking to both the owner, Rupert Murdoch, and the editor-in-chief. And they went forward knowing that they were likely to be sued. So it sounds like they have a lot of confidence in their sources. In general, the standard is really high for a public figure like Trump to prevail in a case where he's accusing someone of defamation. It's true that he settled with CBS and ABC, but a lot of lawyers think that if a judge or jury had adjudicated those cases, that Trump would have lost. And now we think that based on the past. Trump sued the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN over their coverage of the Mueller investigation. All three of those cases got thrown out of court.
I think that's really important context that you bring there, Paul. But Kimberly, Trump suing the Wall Street Journal for at least $10 billion in damages. The sum, to me, told at least part of the story. What was your take on what we saw happen here?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Paul said about this lawsuit really seeming weak. To me, as a former civil litigator, not only does he have to prove that the Wall Street Journal acted with actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth, he actually has to prove that it is false, that it was not something that he wrote, and also that his reputation was damaged. And of course, we've already seen videos of Trump hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. We already know in interviews he talked about him being a friend and enjoying young women. So the idea that this picture somehow in itself creates some new defamation point that harms his reputation, I think will be nearly impossible to prove. But this is Donald Trump trying to flex his legal muscle, put an absolutely, in my opinion, nonsensical sum on it. Usually you have to, the damages that you get is from the reputational damage. And as I noted, I can't see him proving that he suffered any at all in this case. So I think that this is largely frivolous, but the point isn't to win the case, right? The point is to try to pressure media organizations to bend to his will by the use of the court system, which he has consistently done. Unfortunately, we've known several cases where that has worked in the form of a settlement. But in this case, I do hope that the Wall Street Journal holds steady.
Yeah, that's why that number talked so loudly, at least to me, Kim, when I first saw this suit and the $10 billion figure attached to it. I think, Luke, the other side of the coin is, as much as we're talking about the fact that Trump likes to flex his legal muscle, the other output of filing a case like this means that it might stay in the news cycle for longer at a time when Trump keeps trying to tell people, let's stop talking about Epstein. Obviously, that hasn't worked yet, but does the White House have any concern that this could have the unintended effect of, yes, showing that Trump has legal fight, but then also that this is still very much in the news cycle?
Right. It's definitely a risk. This is the story that Donald Trump has not been able to outrun in his second term. Many times when there's a bad news cycle for the president, he's able to quickly move on to something else. The Trump administration has this flood the zone strategy where they're doing so much all the time. It's hard for the news media and the public to keep up with them. But the Jeffrey Epstein files have dogged the president for more than 2 weeks now. And so what they've done with these latest moves, both the filing against the Wall Street Journal and also with the filing in New York to release some of the grand jury testimony, is they're trying to shift the focus of responsibility onto other people besides Donald Trump, right? They can unify the MAGA base, or at least attempt to, against a mainstream media outlet. That's been a strategy Donald Trump has used all along throughout his career. The other is that he can shift the blame for releasing documents not on himself at his own Department of Justice, but on a judge in New York, and can say, well, look, this federal judge is the reason you can't have more information, not Pam Bondi or myself. So will the MAGA base go along with this strategy and shift the blame onto others instead of the Trump administration? That remains to be seen, because right now Donald Trump is under a lot of political pressure from his very own supporters.
Yeah, and understandably so, right? Because while he was on the campaign trail, he and now other key officials of his orbit, who were once, of course, out of office and talking about this as lay people, were promising more transparency around the Epstein files. Now they are the very ones with control of the levers of power of government, and now that transparency is not coming.
Polls show that Americans are paying attention to the recent revelations in the Epstein case. CNN chief data analyst Harry Enton now with what the numbers tell us about how the public and the president's base feel about the story that won't seem to go away.
Interest in the Epstein files and the Epstein case is sky high, and the American public does not trust what the government is selling them. What are we talking about here? Is the government hiding Epstein's alleged client list? Get this, 69% of Americans agree that the federal government is, in fact, hiding Epstein's alleged client list versus just 6% who say that they are not. And get this, a majority of Republicans and Democrats do, in fact, agree on this issue that the government is hiding Epstein's alleged client list. You can never get a majority of Republicans and Democrats to agree on anything, but they do agree on this particular issue. And perhaps not so surprisingly, you get a plurality of Democrats and Republicans agreeing that they are dissatisfied with the amount of information that the government has released so far. What are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about, if we look at Republicans and independents who lean Republican, 43% are dissatisfied with the amount of information released so far, compared to, get this, just 4% of Republicans who are in fact satisfied with the amount of information released so far by the federal government when it comes to the Epstein case. And we look over here on this side of the screen among Democrats. Get this, 60% of Democrats and independent leaning Democrats are in fact dissatisfied with the amount of information released so far. And get this, just 3% of Democrats are in fact satisfied so far with the amount of information released. Now you see this, you see that the plurality of Republicans are dissatisfied.
Territory here where the conspiracy theories begin to, you start making fun, you start sort of poking and saying, hey, look at this contradiction. And then you start sort of feeding into those same conspiracy theories that there's something here. The basic facts of the case are already out there. I have some questions specifically about Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 plea deal with the Department of Justice. That's something that would be interesting, but the sort of more titillating aspects of this, we know what the story is. We know what he did. We know what Ghislaine Maxwell did. She's in jail right now because of it. There's not much more there, but these politicians can't help themselves in playing into it. And I think it's a real problem on both sides of the aisle here.
Sarah, somewhat to that point, it is really something how this is gaining steam on a much broader, or with a much broader audience, right, than where it initially began. In fact, my colleague Brian Selter pointing out that a search of Epstein's name on YouTube, filtered only to show videos uploaded in the last week, found more than 40 with more than 1 million views each, a number of them featuring late-night TV hosts roasting Trump. But the fact that this has found such a broader audience and has some staying power also speaks to the narrative in many ways.
Absolutely. So when you take a look at the issue that's at the core of the Epstein case, there's actually two. One is child exploitation, which has always been such an issue on the the right and amongst Trump's base. And then the other is deep state cover-up, right? Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, ahead of entering the FBI, a big rallying cry was the deep state, the government is trying to cover this up. And so this was a core case for the MAGA right. And how this has evolved is Democrats are now seizing on this issue because, to Michael's point, when there's a lack of information or it looks like there's information being covered up, that's the best way for conspiracies to fester. And Democrats are seizing on that opportunity, seizing on some of these conspiracies to try to put pressure on the president. This has now then created a situation where this topic, this story, is hot on both sides of the political aisle. Both sides have something to politically gain from it. And so that's why, in part, it's becoming so viral. I also think that this is one of those things where every time Donald Trump or an ally tries to, fan the flames and say there's nothing to see here, it motivates people to say, hey, wait a minute, I think there is something to see here. And so I don't think that this is going away from the news cycle anytime soon. And just to the point at the top about this lingering, Isaac was saying this, you have Congress coming back to vote if they were to do something, Ro Khanna and Massey, in September. We are still in July, Erica, so this is like 6 to 8 weeks where this is going to continue to build up until Congress, if they do, can take any action on it.
This is already a loss for Donald in a couple key ways. One, he's not actually going to win the lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, right? He's not going to, because to prove defamation, you have to prove a willful intent to deceive and be dishonest about somebody. And also, you have to prove that, one, you caused harm, and critically, that it's the truth. That it's not the truth. That it's actually a lie. So, Donald likely drew what they said he drew. They likely have double, triple, quadruple checked everything. But even if for some reason it turns out it was wrong, Trump would have to prove that they knowingly knew it was wrong, that they weren't tricked by a forgery, for example. If they were good faith tricked, that would be awfully embarrassing for the paper, but it wouldn't be actionable in the same way. But more than that, leave aside whether Trump was slandered or not, and I don't think he was, right? What really also matters is this was an effort to silence people and to turn the American public on his side. And what we're seeing from the polling is that it hasn't worked. We've seen people continue to talk about this. If you look at the mainstream news and many people on commentary here on YouTube, this story's not going away. This story is still like the number one story, right? So he's failed at that regard. And the public is still against him. Right? Donald has created a broad ideological alliance of people against his position here. I want to just give one example, and this isn't to throw shade at anybody, but there's a lot of like creators on this website who are like, I don't talk politics. Like I don't talk politics. And the reason they say that is in part because they know they have both Democrats and Republicans that watch them, and they don't want to anger 40 to 60% of their audience by taking a stance on a contentious issue. But because 95% of people, Republican and Democrat, understand that Trump is wrong here, everybody's talking about this and it's not going away.